The talk is entitled Psychosynthesis. Descent of spirit into matter and its subsequent return to its source is described by all of the classical esoteric teachings and the major religions of our world. Theosophy describes the homeward journey to the source of our being as the spiritual path or path of return. This entails us adopting spiritual practices and disciplines as a means of establishing union with what we call the soul or higher self. On this basis, we become aligned to the rhythms of the universe and capable of expressing its evolutionary intent. Functioning on behalf of the monad, our Father in heaven, the evolutionary objective of the soul is to unfold its symbolic lotus petals of knowledge, love, and sacrifice. This, of course, is achieved through the mechanism of the soul in the lower worlds, the human personality. The symbol of the soul as a potter, molding the clay of the personality upon the rotating wheel of rebirth, is especially apt. Of course, it takes many lives for the higher self to fashion a personality that can function as a suitable instrument of expression in this material world. Here we see the potter creating an urn, a receptacle that can receive substance, we would say the metaphorical waters of the plains of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, and thereafter dispense them for the benefit of humanity and the planetary consciousness. So we should be aware that as members of the human kingdom, the soft, malleable, symbolic clay of our personality is gradually being molded into a structure that is aligned to the intent of the higher self. Of course, the zodiacal wheel must rotate many, many times before our personality vehicles, what we refer to as the physical, astral, and mental bodies, are fused into a coherent and integrated structure that allows the soul to fulfill its intent. When we are molded into a suitable spiritual receptacle for divine energy, we become eligible for the next stage of the evolutionary process. The urn is glazed and placed into the kiln being a symbol for the burning ground of initiation. It is only then that the urn is capable of receiving and dispensing the spiritual waters of the causal realms of our being. It can then pour them out in its own specific way, in accordance with the conditions of the Aquarian age, Aquarius being the sign of the water bearer, pouring out the waters of knowledge for the purpose of slaking the thirst of the spiritual seeker. Here is an image from Greek mythology of Ganymede, the most handsome youth alive. His good looks did not escape the attention of Zeus, the supreme Olympian, who adopted the form of an eagle and descended down to Mount Ida, where Ganymede was tending his flock of sheep. Zeus snatched Ganymede, took him up to the Olympian realms, and engaged in intercourse with him. Thereafter, Ganymede became the cupbearer to the gods, dispensing the ambrosia or nectar. So let's very briefly break down the symbolism of this myth. Ganymede is a symbol of the spiritual aspirant who, through undertaking spiritual disciplines, renders oneself sufficiently attractive to the divine to allow this descent and abduction to the higher realms of consciousness. Zeus, the supreme Olympian, is a symbol for our spiritual essence, the monad. And when we are sufficiently attractive to the monad, this divine intercourse occurs. We undergo the process of initiation, and we can dispense the energies of the causal realms for the benefit of humanity. Ganymede is the cupbearer dispensing ambrosia. This is the Amrita of the Vedic teachings, the elixir of life of the alchemists. And you will find this occurring in different ways, symbolized in different ways, in different teachings. It would also be the sacred drink, the mead of the Druids. And what we are describing here is the process of initiation. I'm sure you're all aware. Theosophy describes 5 initiations prior to liberation from the wheel of rebirth. Each of these conferring expansions in consciousness, elevation in one's level of being, and an increased capacity both to carry and to express the divine life force. Of particular interest to us here is the 3rd initiation, where the integrated personality, stable under all situations of involvement with the external world, where the aspirant has scaled the cliff face of the symbolic mountain, and thereafter been transfigured into a spiritual instrument. This transformation confers awareness of an aspect of the evolutionary design, the intent of the planetary logos, and the initiate must then implement this as an act of service. Theosophy states that after this initiation, the monad is definitely guiding the soul. In the Bible, we have the symbolism of Moses ascending the slopes of Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of law, inaugurating the Aryan age, this being a symbol of the 3rd initiation. Of course, there are others. In Norse myth, Odin is suspended on the world tree Yggdrasil to acquire the secrets of the runes, so he can use these for the benefit of humanity. Heracles overcomes the hellhound Cerberus, thereby completing his 12 labors. These are all representative of this process. Carl Jung spoke of individuation. That was his way of describing initiation. Individuation occurs when the conscious and the unconscious aspects of the human psyche are unified. Of course, residing with the unconscious is what we call the soul, the higher self. When individuation occurs, one may then consciously express the energies of the archetypes, which Jung described as divine ideas. And this is a very challenging process, of course, as the aspirant is subjected to the various energies of the unconscious and all that this entails. Jung and Assagioli were friends. Their psychologies were rather similar. Assagioli used the term psychosynthesis to describe this process, a synthesis of the various components of the psyche, conscious, unconscious, soul and personality, and so on. Assagioli also described this as self-realization. In this process, one seeks to purify and integrate one's personality, the mental, astral, and physical bodies, the personality's qualities and functions, into a coherent structure. When this has been achieved, one is capable of functioning as an effective spiritual instrument, expressing the intent of the soul. In the process of psychosynthesis, the existing personality or ego, with its various attitudes, predispositions, desires, and attachments, is effectively deconstructed and thereafter reassembled at a higher point of consciousness, with all that is irrelevant to the process of spiritual development being discarded. This enables a safe and successful infusion of spiritual energy to occur. The medieval alchemists described this in the phrase solve coagula, solve describing a dissolution of the components, and coagula their reconstitution at a higher point of consciousness. I recently came across the book Franz Hartmann with the Adepts, An Adventure Among the Rosicrucians. And you can see on the quote here, dialogue between Madame Blavatsky and the adept Theodorus, who advises her that man's animal principles are the base metals of which his animal organization consists. They must be changed into nobler metals by transforming his vices into virtue, until they pass through all color and turn into the gold of pure spirituality. To accomplish this, it is necessary that the grossest elements in his astral form should die and purify, so that the light of the spirit penetrate through the hard shell and call the inner man into life and activity. The text proceeds to state, the universal process by which the processes of life take place is the unfoldment of life. One who can guide and control the power of life is an alchemist. And today, as we tread the path, we are contemporary alchemists, seeking to transmute the base metal of our transient, corruptible personality into the shining, radiant, eternal, incorruptible gold of the soul or higher self. And when we tread the path, when we seek to effect psychosynthesis, there are negative aspects of our psyche that require removal or transmutation. Some of these we may hold dear, but we must still address these if we are to proceed further on our symbolic mountainous ascent. And when we tread the path, it's important to bear in mind that the journey is the goal. It is the experiences along the way that result in our spiritual growth, expansions in our consciousness and in our level of being. There is a famous quote from Madame Blavatsky's Voice of the Silence. Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself. Here's an image of the famous Raphael painting, The School of Athens. It zooms in on Socrates and Plato. And Socrates described the spiritual path as the jeweled way, a pathway ablaze with flashes of illumination. And Socrates would turn inwards to consult his higher self, that he referred to as his daemon. He would seek insight and inspiration from his daemon to ensure that his course of action was appropriate. And similarly, we should do likewise, undertaking our spiritual disciplines of study, meditation, and service, and maintaining a spiritual diary where we record our spiritual experiences, where we posit questions to the higher self and we await feedback. This feedback comes through symbolism. The current frontier of human consciousness, as I'm sure you all know, is the level of abstract thought, the ability to think about matters that relate neither to our survival instincts nor the pursuit of our many desires. And we exercise this faculty through studying philosophy, the arts, especially the wisdom teachings, and more so through studying symbolism, the symbolism of cipher-like characters, the symbolism of myth, and the symbolism of dreams. This symbolism is the means by which the soul seeks to communicate with us. Our various experiences in the outer world, the objects and the circumstances, provide a lexicon with which the soul may communicate with us. And this is very important. Carl Jung stated that archetypes are represented within the human psyche as symbols. The archetypes or divine ideas are in essence the intent of the great solar logos, which we as monads are a part of. Tim mentioned my mentor, the English esotericist and theosophist Douglas Baker. He developed a key to the unconscious, relating the objects and circumstances of the outer world to the symbols and glyphs of astrology. This can enable one to engage in dialogue with the higher self, and there is an existential key to the interpretation of symbols, i.e. the astrological natal chart. What Baker, in my opinion, was seeking to do was create an effective Rosetta Stone of the unconscious. I'm sure you're aware when the Rosetta Stone was discovered by Pierre-Francois Bouchard, we here in the West were then aware of how to translate hieroglyphics, to ascertain meaning from them. And Baker is seeking to do the same thing with his form of esoteric astrology. And why do we do this? Well, Assagioli states, the inner master, the spiritual eye, is omniscient. It sees into the future and has remarkable powers on which we cannot set a limit. Its guidance, inspiration, and multifaceted help can give us light, peace, and security, producing joy and love in us, and making us effective instruments for the good of others. Of course, the path is hard. We will be challenged as the higher self seeks to ascertain our worthiness as its instrument of expression, seeks to dispense with the pool of karma that has accumulated over our many previous lives. The famous esoteric axiom of Hermes Trismegistus, summarized as above, so below, is related to the fact that the divine life that pervades our entire universe tends to display similar qualities in the various forms which it activates and expresses itself through. And on this basis, we witness analogies of the process of spiritual transformation in the lower kingdoms of nature. One such analogy, we see on the slide here, is found in the various stages of the flowering of a plant, where the monad plants its seed into the spiritual world in pursuit of spiritual staying power. And it's important to note that at the stage prior to flowering, even under the poorest and most challenging conditions, the plant's energy is focused upon sending its energy up to the bud so that it may flower and thereby become a radiant center of beauty. And similarly, when we tread the spiritual path, seeking to effect psychosynthesis, we must do the same, regardless of what is going on in our lives, regardless of the protestations and cravings of our personality vehicles. We should be aware that we are here to develop and express the intent of the soul by expressing its qualities in the outer world. And we must give that our complete attention, and it's the ultimate priority in our lives. Here is the famous, well, one of the famous 4 Mahavakyas, or great sayings of the Vedanta teachings, Tattvamasi, or that thou art. We must be aware that we are placed in physical form for the purpose of expressing the intent of the soul. Theosophy informs us that my soul and your soul are one and the same, in that they are part of the consciousness of the greater being within which they reside, the planetary logos. Whilst we each have our own existential soul's purpose, this is always in accord with the intent of the greater being within which we reside. And psychosynthesis and its related practices, especially meditation, offer us a means of obtaining energy from the soul and thereby sharing in the energies and powers of the greater being which we are a part of. Indian traditions commonly symbolize the inner journey, the spiritual path, as the crossing of a river to the other shore, leaving the shore of everyday life, the realm of Maya, to reach the shore of transcendence. And this river that we must cross is broad and dangerous, but the divine ferryman can bring his devotees to the other side. Here is an image of one of the Jain saviors, a Tirthankara. The word means crossing maker. The Buddhists talk of yanas or ferry boats, vehicles which we may utilize to journey to the source of our being. And of course, the mystical aspects of the world religions, various esoteric practices, are designed to function in a similar fashion, as of course as Baker's form of esoteric astrology, which I briefly mentioned. Jungians talk of the night sea journey, where one is subjected to the forces of the unconscious, both personal and collective. This includes accessing, dealing appropriately with the energies of what Asa Jolie described as superconscious, the realm of the soul, Atma Buddhi Manas, and also all aspects of our lower instinctual nature, including what Theosophy refers to as the dweller on the threshold, this being the sum total of our personality attributes accumulated over our many lives, and all that we fear and all that is repressed and that we find undesirable. Here is an image of a river crossing featuring St. Christopher, who was advised by a hermit being symbolic of the wise man within, advised to serve Christ by assisting people in crossing a dangerous river. He performs this task for a considerable period of time. Then one day a small child appears, asking Christopher if he can ferry him across the river. Whilst carrying the child, the infant becomes enlarged. He weighs very heavily on Christopher's shoulders, to the extent that he can barely carry him. When he eventually reaches the other shore, Christopher advises the child that the entire world in his shoulders would have weighed less than he. The child replies that he is Christ himself, and that Christopher has been carrying not only the whole world, but he who made it. So the symbolism here beautifully portrays the importance of spiritual service as a means of successfully treading the path where we support the Christ principle within, regardless of the many challenges we face fording the river of the unconscious. To elaborate slightly, here is an image of Christ on the cross. Christian teachings state that Christ died for the sins of humanity. Esoteric teachings inform us that the earth has a challenging and painful karma, and it is not a case of simply sharing it out amongst the billions of monads operating through the earth scheme, but rather those more advanced on the spiritual path are expected to take on a greater share of the planetary karma, which Christ did, effectively dying for the sins of humanity. When treading the path, it can be helpful to adhere to an old esoteric maxim, not that we should live in this world less, but in both worlds more. And of course, this is very challenging, but it is essential that we do this if we are going to integrate our mind, emotions, and body, together with associated elements of our character, into a single sovereign entity that can function as a spiritual instrument. And as sparks of the divine, we are challenged to develop and express our spirituality amidst the many constraints of physical form. We must be aware that we have incarnated as part of a divine plan, which entails us functioning as a holistic being, expressing the intent of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Here is an image of the phoenix bird. In psychosynthesis and in esoteric teachings in general, this is a symbol that represents the ability of the personality to extricate itself from the mundane, materialistic circumstances of everyday life and to become soul infused. The phoenix rises from its ashes, rises from its demise as a self-centered, self-serving personality soaring towards the sun, a symbol of its immortal nature. Whilst there are, of course, existential factors at play when we tread the spiritual path, there are various practices or techniques that we can all adopt as a means of assistance here. As I said, the spiritual path presents us with the challenges of transmuting our various desires into spiritual aspiration, overcoming our habits, impulses, prejudices, and complexes, as a means of enabling the soul to infuse us with its energies. There are the fundamentals of study of the esoteric and religious teachings, meditation as a means of building the antakarana, or rainbow bridge that links soul and personality, through which we may obtain energy and meaning from the soul, and service to humanity, service being very important. We are all aspects of the divine life. We all live within the body of a greater being, or in simple terms, we are all rowing the same boat, and therefore we should assist each other. A few years before she assumed the British throne, our late Queen Elizabeth, on her 21st birthday, stated, I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Elizabeth, regardless of one's views of the monarchy, was a great exemplar of service, and we as theosophers, treading the path, aware that we are all part of the consciousness of a greater being, should seek to do the same. The process of psychosynthesis entails the purification and refinement of our personality so that we may function on behalf of the soul. And spiritual cleansing should be a central theme in our lives. We seek to purify our attitudes whilst developing a spiritually based value system. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, we have the yamas and niyamas, or the universal morality and personal observances. We have the 7 virtues of Christianity. We have the paramitas of Buddhism. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta employ the term vasana, describing behavioral tendencies or karmic imprints that influence our behavior at present. These are derived from the impressions of our previous lives, known as samskaras. They give rise to what these teachings call vrittis, or thoughts, that are generally intertwined with the desire nature. And the Vedanta teachings employ the analogy of the mirror of personality being cleansed of its vasanas, whereby it may reflect the light of the immortal aspect of our being. These teachings refer to this as the Atman. Of course, we say the soul or higher self as the instrument of the monad. Here is an image of Perseus, the statue in Piazza della Signoria in Florence. He is holding aloft the head of Medusa. That is his hero quest, to obtain the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Medusa possesses a terrifying countenance that will turn onlookers to stone. She is a symbol of the darkest, most terrifying aspects of the monad's journey through matter, including the facing of the dweller on the threshold. The goddess Athena, who represents the support that the archetypal goddess principle offers to the questing hero, the spiritual aspirant, she provides Perseus with a mirror shield. So rather than look at Medusa directly and be petrified, he can view her through the mirror and thereby decapitate her. The mirror shield, of course, I relate this to the Vedanta teachings and the purified personality. The purified personality can elevate its consciousness to the spiritual realms of being. There is a correspondence between Medusa and the Hindu Kali, whose dance of destruction sweeps all before her. However, it destroys the transient, the ephemeral, the forms. When we raise our consciousness to the level of the soul, we are impervious to this. And this is all indicated in the Perseus myth. And when Medusa is slain, the winged horse Pegasus emerges, symbolizing the ability of one's consciousness to soar to the Olympian heights. We would describe these as the planes of the soul. In the process of psychosynthesis, we must be aware that what is testing to us as personalities is equally elevating to the soul in terms of the realization of its intent. So adversity represents an opportunity. There is a famous Shakespearean quote, "Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything." And when we experience adverse circumstances, this is our opportunity to express divine persistent will. Asa Jolie emphasized the importance of the correct application of will in the process of spiritual transformation, where the personal will ultimately is aligned to the divine will. Here is an image of the famous Scottish rugby player. I don't know if he's famous enough that you're all aware of him, Doddy Weir. He was diagnosed with motor neuron disease in 2016. He went on to establish a charity. The last time I checked, it had raised £9 million in fighting this awful disease. And there is a wonderful example of divine persistent will. We should be aware that challenges test us within the crucible, or I could say alembic, of human experience, offering the opportunity towards enhancing our spiritual growth. We must be aware in seeking to unfold its symbolic lotus petals, the soul is playing a long game. It's not all going to happen in this life. Well, not for many of us anyway. It's something I found out very painfully in my early 30s. And one should be cognizant of this fact and the priorities of the soul. Asa Jolie states, the self considers things, events, beings, etc., in a different way to the personal I. Its value system and its perspective is very different to the way the ordinary conscious mind looks at things with its short-sighted views. What the self reveals is consistent with what is truly good, but it can be contrary to our wishes or personal preferences. So when we undertake our spiritual disciplines, we seek to align our personal will to that of the soul, and the development and expression of Atma is very important, both in persisting in our spiritual endeavors and in subjecting our personality vehicles to the intent of the higher self. Included here is the overcoming of attachments, which represent a serious impediment to our spiritual growth. We can have attachments at the physical level, the emotional level, and at the mental level. In this respect, Asa Jolie states, every attachment is an error at odds with the law of life, because it is a vain, desperate attempt to get hold of part of that life and make it fixed or rigid, isolated from the rest of life. Whereas, in fact, life is a unified whole, an immense current in a continual state of flow, a dynamic phenomenon which is being continually transformed. We must tear out the attachments, at our attachments by their roots. Here is Shiva dancing upon Apasmara, the metaphorical dwarf of ignorance. And likewise, we should be aligned to Shiva's dance so we may do the same. And when we possess these attachments, we are effectively trying to create a freeze frame in terms of the functioning of the universe. And of course, this is very much at odds with the divine intent. So on our spiritual journey as personalities, we should seek to develop a strong sense of empathy for the soul that is seeking to express its intent through us. We should always be aware that as personalities, our structure is transient and exists as a means of the soul fashioning an instrument capable of expressing its intent. This, of course, taking many lives. I gave the analogy of the potter creating the urn and the wheel of rebirth earlier. There is an old axiom: we should learn to love where we are, who we are with, and what we are doing, mindful of the fact that the soul places us in situations with certain people and that this can promote our spiritual growth. These situations represent opportunities. And of course, this can be damn difficult at times. There are often clashes with personalities, particularly in respect of the will and one getting one's own way, or there are just general tensions. But my advice is to look within oneself and see what the experience is seeking to teach you. Having said that, we must also apply discrimination here. My recently departed friend, Stuart Trotter, the ex-organising secretary of the Scottish TS, he had a phrase: if there's a pile of dog shit in front of you, Gary, you walk around it, you don't walk through it. And that's also important to bear in mind. That was something I tended to metaphorically walk through it when I was younger, whereas now I like to think on the whole I'm a bit wiser. When we tread the path, our efforts are never wasted. It's important we should be aware of this. Spiritual growth occurs at great depth. It's not necessarily seen on the surface level of life. And when we express the qualities of the soul, divine persistent will, love wisely applied, wisdom lovingly applied, when we exercise abstract thought, this creates vibrations within the permanent atoms of the soul where these qualities are stored. We are depositing energies into these cosmic reservoirs, and we can draw on these later in this life and in our subsequent ones. And of course, our previous lives provide us all with the potential here that we can draw upon. When we tread the spiritual path, we find that certain talents and abilities, certain forms of understanding that we did not hitherto possess, suddenly surface in our consciousness. In the process of psychosynthesis, it's important that we recognize our faults and the various spiritual impediments we possess. We acknowledge these and go about removing them in a detached manner, rather like a scientist in a laboratory. Not being self-deprecating in the light of discovering various weaknesses and barriers that we possess. As if we do this, we're overemphasizing our personality at the expense of the soul, which is gradually molding us into a suitable spiritual receptacle. There is one technique of psychosynthesis I particularly like, that I feel is of great value, where we recognize what is harmful or obstructive within our psyche, and we then seek to cultivate the opposite quality. I've given a few examples here. If there is discord in our lives, we seek to cultivate harmony. If we are a restless, impatient person, we substitute this with a patient, self-disciplined approach. If we are thinking thoughts of a selfish nature, we replace these with selfless, inclusive thoughts. If we are fearful, we develop courage. And if we are oversensitive to affairs in the outer world, and our relationships with others and what's going on. Rather, we turn that sensitivity inward to the higher self who is seeking to communicate with us. And by this process, the various negative aspects of our character that we possess serve a valuable purpose because they make us aware of the virtues that we need to then develop. Of course, when we tread the path, we must overcome the factor of desire. Desire is healthy as the monad sends its mechanisms into matter, and the soul is seeking to experience all that life out there is offering. But when the spiritual path beckons, desire then must be overcome, transmuted. Of course, desire creates many attachments to objects, to circumstances, to other people. And we set about transmuting this when we tread the path. The potency of the astral plane, where desire is found, is centered on the solar plexus chakra we see here, located in the abdominal region. The energies of the astral plane enter the aura there, and the astral body synthesizes these so they can be used effectively. And we have a choice here. We can either use these energies to pursue various desires, or in accord with the evolutionary intent, we can use these energies creatively and in spiritual ways. And the key to this is through expressing the energies of the alter ego, the higher counterpart of the solar plexus chakra, the heart chakra, of course. This is especially emphasized when we seek spiritual transformation. In terms of the seven ray teachings, the second ray of love wisdom rules the heart chakra. It is the ray of our solar system. And when we tread the path, seeking to express the qualities of the heart chakra, we place ourselves in the embrace of the mothering ray of our solar system. And there's certain things that we must develop and express here. One is expressing unconditional and inclusive forms of love, not selfish or jealous love, which, comes from the astral plane and the solar plexus chakra and the astral body. It doesn't mean that we love those around us any less, but rather the love extends outwards so that it becomes universal. It can be expressed in altruistic and humanitarian ways. Here is an image of one of my favorite teachers, the Bulgarian master, Peter Dunov, or Peter Dunov, however you wish to pronounce it. I think the Bulgarian pronunciation is Peter Dunov. Here is a quote from Dunov that says, "One day love will stand above everything. It will wipe out all defects. It is the only power that sets everything to rights. Leave everything to love. It will put everything right." And when we seek to express the heart chakra, we should seek to develop an inner peace based upon the realization that we're an aspect of the divine life that infuses our entire universe, and that we are in essence immortal. This, of course, assists us in developing empathy, radiating compassion to others. Empathy, compassion also being heart chakra qualities. And we should seek to function as a center of living peace, radiating these energies outwards for the benefit of others. In this respect, Asajoli states, peace is only to be found when it is deliberately sought in the higher spiritual world, and when a person succeeds in firmly remaining at that level. It is from this place of peace that we direct all our personal activities, provide them with strength, make them effective and constructive, because they are free from ambition, fear, or any sense of attachment. In other words, we are able to live as masters and not as slaves. Another heart chakra quality that is very important is that of humility. It's no coincidence that the zodiacal sign governing spiritual initiation is Capricorn, which also rules the knees, which are a symbol of humility. Capricorn and its planetary ruler Saturn serve to confer humility upon those who lack this quality. And, if necessary, metaphorically, perhaps even literally, the archetypal qualities of this sign may force us to our knees in the process. Spiritual initiation will not occur until we're prepared to metaphorically kneel as a means of receiving the energies transmitted by the initiatory rod. Here is an image of Bellerophon, one of the Greek heroes. He conquered the chimera, the hybrid monster. As a result, he grew in fame and stature. Very sadly, his hubris developed exponentially. He decided that he possessed the capacity to soar to the Olympian heights on the back of Pegasus. Zeus, the supreme Olympian, is furious at this. He sends a gadfly to sting the rump of Pegasus, who catapults Bellerophon down to the earth, where he lands in a rose bush. He is rendered lame and blind and wanders the earth a lonely and miserable man. It is our spiritual essence, the monad, here symbolized by Zeus, that determines our eligibility for initiation, expansions in consciousness, the psychosynthesis of Assagioli, the individuation of Jung. We don't decide this ourselves. Harmlessness is another heart chakra quality. We say harmlessness in thought, in word, and in deed. Again, this is based on the realization that we are all part of the one divine life, and therefore to emit any sort of harmful energy is detrimental both to the sender and the recipient. Harmlessness practice also fosters right human relations, which is so very important, of course. I don't need to spell that out to anyone. Courage comes from the heart, fear from the solar plexus chakra. And when we are going to be tested on the path, of course, and we must display great courage as symbolized by the various heroes of world myth. Anyone who has studied the Bhagavad Gita will be aware that the Pandava Arjuna, well, he is initially terrified at the prospect of doing battle with his enemies, the Kauravas. And it is the divine manifestation of Vishnu through his charioteer Krishna who infuses Arjuna with the necessary courage and valor to fulfill his dharma as a Kshatriya or warrior, engaging in the righteous allegorical war. The Pandavas are a symbol for the qualities of the soul. The Kauravas are self-serving. They symbolize the desires and the instincts. In this great work, Krishna is provided with 3 injunctions: to act without regard for the fruits of one's action, to avoid identification with action, and to dedicate one's action to Brahman, the transcendent reality, the eternal aspect of one's being. In simple terms, he's being told to function as a soul and get that bloody ego out of the way. It's interesting to note, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the ranks of the enemy, the Kauravas, are many of Arjuna's friends, teachers indeed, and these are symbolic of aspects of the personality that we may hold dear, but must still be addressed if we are to proceed in our ascent of the symbolic mountain. I couldn't possibly talk about heart chakra qualities without mentioning discrimination, the ability to discriminate between the real and the unreal, the real being that which is genuinely spiritual, and the unreal being that which is ephemeral or transient. The Hindus call this Viveka, and there is a very famous work by Adi Shankara, the crest jewel of discrimination, Viveka Chudamani. And he lists this as the most essential quality required for us to obtain if we are to succeed in treading the spiritual path. In the voice of the silence, it states, unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. Unless thou seest, thou canst not hear. Beautiful poetic instruction here. We must hear the inner voice of the soul as a means of seeing the outer world as it essentially is, an agglomeration of forms infused in essence by the one life. Similarly, if we view the material world as an assemblage of appearances infused by the indwelling life principle, we become more attuned to the inner voice. Self-observation when treading the path is very important. Psychosynthesis introduces a technique of us functioning as the witness or observer rather than as the doer or the observed. On this way, we become more self-aware. We become aware of the functioning of our astral and mental bodies when they are activated in different scenarios in everyday life. And in doing so, we then no longer respond to situations in a mechanical way, but rather we choose as to how we are going to react, this being more in accord with the intent of the soul. As Assagioli states, drives and desires constitute the active, dynamic aspect of our psychological life. The procedure necessitates disidentification from them, at least temporarily, and this in turn means acquiring awareness of the self, the conscious I, as distinct from these psychological elements and forces, and from that central point of observing their flow. Now, there is a famous disidentification exercise. I'm not going to actually take you through it. I'm just going to explain what it is very simply. If anyone wants an extract from my book in this respect, then if they mention it in the chat, I can just take it out. I'm not going to say, buy my book and you can read the exercise. I'm very happy just to give this out, but it's simple enough. We begin by relaxing our bodies, breathing regularly, and first of all, we consider our physical body, its various qualities and functions. And we emphasize its role as an instrument of the soul in terms of enabling the soul to contact the physical plane. And we make the affirmation, I am not my body, I'm the knower of my body. And then we proceed to the astral body. We consider our recent or current state of being emotionally. And we affirm that whilst we experience the emotional content of our psyche, we are not the transient fleeting emotions here that oscillate between various highs and lows. And we affirm, I am not my emotions, I am the knower of my emotions. Then we observe our mind or mental body. And we affirm that whilst we possess a mind, and we recognize its ceaselessly changing constituents, what William James referred to as the stream of consciousness, or the chattering monkey of Buddhism. And this ceaselessly changing content of the mind is not our real or enduring nature. And we affirm, I am not my thoughts, I am the knower of my thoughts. Then we ask ourselves a question, who am I? Who am I? This is done as a means of asserting the independence and authority of the soul. Who am I? And we may answer this by stating, I am a being of light, I am a center of pure consciousness, love, and will. I particularly like the who am I bit. It stops the personality vehicles in their tracks, or at least it does mine. So this is a very, very valuable and very simple exercise. It can be of great value to us. Many of you will be aware that the human personality is constituted by what exponents of psychosynthesis and related transpersonal psychological practices describe as subpersonalities. These are primarily personality structures that we have developed as a means of coping with circumstances that we have previously encountered, especially in infancy and childhood, also in adolescence and early adulthood. And by observing our actions and reactions to various scenarios in our lives, analyzing our motivations here, we become aware of various subpersonalities which will assume center stage depending on our social circumstances or how we are feeling at any given time. And these fragments of our overall personality, they take many forms, and it can be helpful to identify ours. Here is a list of some, but of course, these are legion. I've just put some up there, and you'll meet some people, they're often playing the victim, or they're the hopeless idealist, or perhaps they're a bit of a bully, but usually because they're being bullied by someone else. And, you know, the whole bullying process is rather like a food chain, you know, it just tends to swallow everybody up. But when we become aware of these aspects of ourselves that are often disparate, we are practicing discrimination, viveka. We are emphasizing and asserting the authority of the higher self. And as we become aware of these subpersonalities, it gives us the opportunity to integrate them, to transform them into a higher unity, rather than simply responding to their dictates. The last psychosynthesis technique I'm going to mention is the daily review. When we're laying in bed at night, we can think about our actions during the day, when the various personality vehicles were assuming control, when subpersonalities were center stage. It can be helpful to do this in a backwards order rather than the standard linear order starting from the morning and working upwards. This tends to throw a spanner in the works of the monkey mind, which I always like. I like some forms of abstract art. I like some forms of dissonant music, and, you know, which is the purpose of these, of course, to say, halt, stop, get into gear, get into a different gear that is more appropriate to expressing the intent of the soul. So as a means of elaborating upon his friend Jung's concept of collective unconscious, Assagioli postulated the existence of a superconscious, which we would relate to the planes of the soul, Atma, Buddhi, and higher manas. This is where the archetypes of Jung are first expressed in their pure form. And of course, our highest potential is found here. This is a realm that exerts a transformative and regenerative effect upon us. He introduced his egg diagram as a map of the basic structure and dynamics of the human psyche. I've put it beside a diagram of the 7 planes. I think the colors go rather nicely together here. There are variations on Assagioli's model. I simply chose this one online because it was the most colorful one. So when we look at this structure, we will see dotted lines both between levels 1, 2, and 3, and also the shell of the egg is dotted. The dotted lines within the lower unconscious, middle unconscious, and superconscious can facilitate psychological osmosis. These areas are not purely distinct. There is a relationship between them. The shell of the egg, well, the egg is our psyche, and the shell is permeable. It means we receive energies inward from number 7, the collective unconscious, And we also, of course, emit energies outwards into the collective unconscious. So the superconscious is number 3, what I said is Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And this is the sphere of transpersonal qualities, as one would expect. Aesthetic experience, higher states of consciousness, pure intuition, altruism, insights of an artistic, philosophical, or scientific nature. Above 3 is number 6, what Assagioli calls the self, which we would relate to the theosophical monad. It is both functioning within the egg, it is immanent, but part of it is also transcendent. And our personal share of the unconscious, of course, relates to the soul and the qualities of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas that we have expressed in our previous lives. And where archetypal energies relevant to our present incarnation can assist us in the process of psychosynthesis. Number 5, you see the arrow pointing in, is the human personality, and 4 is its everyday level of awareness. This is within number 2, the middle unconscious. The middle unconscious is formed of psychological elements similar to those we experience in waking consciousness. These are easily accessible to us. This is where the basic skills we develop to function in everyday life are found. And number 1 is particularly relevant to our spiritual development. This is the lower unconscious. Could relate this particularly to the lower astral subplanes. This contains our personal psychological past in the form of repressed complexes, long forgotten memories, feelings of fear, shame, guilt, anger, despair, that are consigned in this area beneath the surface level of our awareness. We would also find here the energies that motivate basic instinctual drive, so aptly described by Freud in his concept of the id. Also here is the Jungian shadow, that part of ourselves which we refuse to acknowledge, which is hidden, repressed, mainly inferior and guilt-laden. And of course, Jungian psychology advises us to enter into a constructive relationship with the shadow as part of the process of individuation or psychosynthesis. The dweller on the threshold of theosophy, which is a deeper concept than the Jungian shadow, is particularly adept at utilizing the energies of the lower unconscious, guarding the portal of initiation until we are sufficiently equipped and worthy in terms of overcoming the dweller. So we then confront the angel of the presence, a Davic or angelic aspect of the causal body that guards the portal of initiation. Elements of the superconscious, going back to number 3, may precipitate into our consciousness in the form of intuition, realization, sudden forms of enlightenment. Maslow's peak experiences would be attributed to this level. And of course, we undertake our spiritual disciplines, building the Antakarana, as a means of elevating our consciousness to this realm. There are the beautiful lines in the voice of the silence, which describe one's consciousness ascending up the subplanes of the Buddhic plane. The first is like the nightingale's sweet voice, chanting a song of parting to its mate. The second comes as the sound of a silver symbol of the Dhyanis, awakening the twinkling stars. The next is as the plaint melodious of the ocean sprite, imprisoned in its shell. And this is followed by the chant of Veena, Veena being an Indian instrument. The fifth like sound of bamboo flute shrills in thine ear. It changes next into a trumpet blast, and it proceeds, and then the 7 swallows all the other sounds, they die, and then I heard no more. When the six are slain and at the master's feet are laid, then is the pupil merged into the one, becomes that one, and lives therein. Just very beautiful poetic texts, of course. So one of my favorites. So Assagioli also spoke of the eternal now. This is the voice of the silence, the eighth limb of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras of Samadhi, what we in the West, certainly in the past, used to refer to as cosmic consciousness, or we did, to the best of my knowledge, since the works of Eckhart Tolle, the term eternal now seems to be the main one here. In Assagioli's excellent work, The Transpersonal Dimension of Psychosynthesis, he describes the eternal now. He states, the self has a sense of what is eternal, or, to be more accurate, it lives in eternity, but it is the eternal now that it inhabits, not merely a transcendent eternity cut off from the evolutionary process of development. Eternal now is a paradoxical expression only to be appreciated intuitively, but it provides us with a key to a fundamental truth, and that is connected to the relation between the transcendent and the immanent, being and becoming. Both of these should be present, conscious and at work in us. Of course, these are present when we affect psychosynthesis, when we go through initiation. And here is an image of Siddhartha, his consciousness centered at the immovable point whereby he overcomes the various challenges of karma, Mara, the eternal now, the immovable spot, the quadratura circuli of the alchemists, the squaring of the circle. There are different ways of describing this. So this evening I've sought to describe the spiritual path in the light of Assagioli's teachings in particular. I'm a big fan of his work, hence I drew on a few of his quotes. I think I've actually got the book up here. If anyone's interested, this is really excellent, an excellent compilation. Transpersonal Development, the Dimension Beyond Psychosynthesis. It's a very, very good book. Mine is full of highlights, which made extracting quotes very easily, because I actually bought it when I was writing my first book, because I was quite a fan of Assagioli's. But that concludes my talk. Is it time for questions, or what do we do?